Not every war begins with guns. Some begin quietly, in laboratories, deep underground mines, and in decisions that the rest of the world considers too dirty to make. Today, the United States, the most powerful economy on Earth, is being squeezed by a group of elements most Americans have never heard of. 17 of them. 17 elements from the periodic table, the so-called rare earth elements. Without them, there are no F-35 fighter jets, no nuclear submarines, no radar or sonar, no night vision goggles, no smartphones, no televisions, no wind turbines, no electric vehicles, no modern military, no modern technology. And China controls nearly all of it. The question is not whether China has rare earths. The real question is, how did China win this race so decisively, before anyone else even realized it had begun? The United States did not lose because it lacked resources. Rare earth elements are not actually rare. They exist in many places: the United States, Australia, Brazil, Africa. But there is a brutal reality hidden beneath that fact. If the United States mined rare earths at the same pace China does every year, it would completely exhaust its entire domestic reserves in less than a decade. Brazil, the second largest holder, has less than half of what China possesses. And yet, resource abundance alone does not create power. Power comes from something far more difficult: the ability to turn useless dirt, rock, and metal into something the modern world can actually use. The real battle is refining, not mining. Extracting rare earths is only the beginning. Refining them is where the real war is fought. To isolate just a few grams of usable material, you must crush massive volumes of ore, apply aggressive chemical separation, consume 9 to 13 times more energy than mining itself, generate enormous amounts of toxic waste. The land suffers, the water suffers, the people suffer. And this is where the West walked away. From the 1980s through the 1990s, the United States and Europe began to believe that some industries were simply too dirty to keep at home. So they outsourced them. They closed mines. They shut down refineries. They let the expertise disappear. China did not. Deng Xiaoping saw what others refused to see. After opening its economy in 1978, China's leadership, under Deng Xiaoping, viewed industrialization through a very different lens. Not short-term profit, not quarterly earnings, but strategic capacity. Deng understood something the West overlooked. The industries everyone avoids are often the ones that shape the future. While the United States tightened environmental regulations and allowed rare earth production to collapse, China did the opposite. Not because it ignored the consequences, but because it accepted the trade-off. A deliberate, long-term sacrifice. For decades, China made a decision few democracies could survive politically. It accepted polluted soil, contaminated groundwater, environmental degradation, long-term health risks. In exchange, it built massive industrial infrastructure, enormous refining capacity, low-cost coal-powered energy networks, railways, ports, and logistics on a national scale. The result was simple and devastating to competitors. China's production costs became unbeatable, the silent destruction of global competition. When China began exporting refined rare earths to the world, it did not do so at market prices. It did so at prices no one else could survive. Western companies tried to reopen mines. They went bankrupt. Refining facilities attempted to restart. They shut down. Engineers left the industry. An entire generation of expertise disappeared. Not because the West lacked technology, but because it could not compete at China's price point. Markets were not conquered with weapons. They were conquered with decades of sustained underpricing. China did not just win, it locked the door. By the time the world realized what was happening, the supply chain was already gone. Today, China controls roughly 60% of global rare earth mining, around 90% of refining, and over 90% of rare earth magnet production. China does not merely extract resources, it refines them, processes them, and manufactures the components that make modern technology possible. A fully integrated supply chain, from dirt to device. No other country has anything like it. The moment the world lost its choice, when China began restricting rare earth exports, selectively, strategically, the implications became impossible to ignore. Stockpiles exist, but they drain quickly. And rebuilding an industry that took China 30 years to perfect cannot be done overnight. The world suddenly discovered a terrifying truth. There is no alternative supplier. This was not an accident. It was not luck. It was the result of recognizing a race early and being willing to pay a price no one else would accept. For most of modern history, power came from oil. Whoever controlled oil controlled transportation, industry, and war. But the 21st century runs on something else. not barrels, not pipelines, elements. And China understands this better than anyone. From resource to weapon. When China began tightening export controls on rare earth elements, the move looked technical, bureaucratic, almost boring. It was none of those things. It was a warning. Because rare earths are not evenly important. Some matter far more than others. And China knows exactly which ones. The elements that make war possible. Take samarium. It is a key ingredient in samarium cobalt magnets, magnets that remain stable under extreme heat. That makes them indispensable in missile guidance systems, jet engines, advanced military electronics. Without them, modern fighter jets simply do not function the same way. Or consider terbium. In the hands of a soldier conducting a nighttime raid, terbium turns invisible infrared light into something human eyes can see. Night vision goggles, targeting systems, surveillance optics. No terbium, no dominance after dark. Then there is scandium. Lightweight, strong, exceptionally resistant to fatigue. Perfect for aerospace and naval applications, where every kilogram matters. These are not optional materials. They are foundational. The magnets that move the modern world. One of the most valuable uses of rare earths is not glamorous. Magnets. But these are not ordinary magnets. Rare earth magnets are 10 to 15 times stronger than traditional iron magnets. Smaller, lighter, vastly more efficient. They are the invisible muscles inside modern technology. They make motors spin, turbines turn, hard drives store data, missiles steer, trains levitate. Combine strength with miniaturization and you get efficiency. And efficiency is everything. It is what allows wind turbines to generate power with less wind, electric vehicles to travel farther on the same battery, electronics to shrink while becoming more powerful. Rare earth magnets are the reason modern technology exists in its current form. And China produces over 90% of them. Control the input. Control the output. This is why rare earths represent leverage unlike almost anything else. Oil can be replaced. Gas can be rerouted. Factories can be rebuilt. But rebuilding an entire materials ecosystem, from mining to refining to magnet production, takes decades. China does not need to ban exports entirely. It only needs to limit them. Just enough. Just selectively. Enough to remind the world who controls the choke point. The United States knows this and is trapped. American stockpiles exist, but stockpiles are not solutions. They are timers. Once depleted, production stops. And restarting domestic capacity is not a switch you flip. It is a generational project. This is why rare earths now sit at the center of national security planning. Why export controls hit defense and semiconductor industries first. Why the conversation has shifted from trade to survival. Why chips and rare earths are the same war. The fight over semiconductors and the fight over rare earths are not separate conflicts. They are the same war, fought at different layers. Chips require advanced manufacturing, extreme precision, complex supply chains. Rare earths are the materials those systems rely on. Control the chips, and you control computing. Control the rare earths, and you control everything below computing. China understands that upstream dominance is more powerful than downstream assembly. That is why rare earths matter more than finished products. The Belt and Road Multiplier. China's leverage does not end at its borders. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has spent nearly $100 billion investing in mining operations across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, railways, ports, processing facilities. Energy remains the largest target. Mining is the second. China is not just extracting its own resources. It is positioning itself to influence everyone else's. A global supply chain designed to flow through China. Raw materials from Africa, from South America, from Central Asia. Refined in China, processed in China, turned into components in China. The world may own the dirt. China owns the transformation, and that is where the power lies. The strategic reality. The United States understands this vulnerability. This is why Greenland suddenly became a strategic obsession. Mineral access became a condition of foreign aid. Domestic manufacturing returned to political headlines. But understanding does not equal capability. China's advantage was not built overnight. It was built across 30 years of policy, investment, and sacrifice. Trying to replicate that in 5 years is not strategy. It is panic. A modern resource war. In the 19th and 20th centuries, empires fought over oil. In the 21st century, the fight is over materials that most people cannot pronounce. Samarium, terbium, neodymium, dysprosium. These elements do not make headlines, but they decide outcomes. They determine which nations can build advanced weapons, which can transition to clean energy, and which remain dependent. This is not a temporary advantage. China is not bluffing. It knows stockpiles will run out. Substitutes are limited. Rebuilding capacity takes time. Rare earths are not just an economic tool. They are a strategic pressure point, a slow tightening grip. China did not need to fire a shot. It simply needed to control the elements that make modern power possible. And by the time the world understood that reality, the door was already closed. The problem facing the United States is not a lack of money. It is not a lack of technology. And it is certainly not a lack of motivation. The problem is time. You cannot rebuild a lost industry overnight. China's dominance over rare earths did not happen by accident. It was built deliberately, over decades. From the early 1990s onward, China invested continuously in mining capacity, refining infrastructure, magnet manufacturing, logistics, and energy networks. Every stage reinforced the next. Every year widened the gap. Trying to reverse that kind of lead is not a matter of funding a few projects. It means rebuilding an entire industrial ecosystem from scratch. The human capital problem, one of the most underestimated barriers, is talent. According to U.S. policy assessments, more than half of America's mining workforce is expected to retire by the end of this decade. Replacing them will not be easy. In 2020, the United States awarded just a few hundred degrees in mining and mineral engineering. In China, a single university program enrolls more than 1,000 undergraduates and hundreds of graduate students in the same field. This is not just a gap in production. It is a gap in knowledge. And knowledge compounds. Energy is the hidden bottleneck. Rare earth refining is brutally energy intensive. Separating and purifying these elements requires massive amounts of electricity, far more than mining itself. China has an advantage few others are willing to accept: cheap, abundant coal-fired power. While Western countries debate energy transitions and environmental limits, China continues to operate an energy system designed for industrial scale. That keeps costs low, and low costs keep competitors out. Environmental reality cannot be ignored. Even if the United States were willing to rebuild refining capacity, it would face political resistance at every step. Refining rare earths produces toxic waste. It contaminates soil and groundwater. It carries long-term health risks. These are not abstract concerns. They are exactly why the West abandoned the industry in the first place. Rebuilding it now would require accepting trade-offs that democratic societies have spent decades rejecting. Subsidies are not a shortcut. Governments can subsidize factories. They can offer tax credits. They can pour billions into incentives. What they cannot do is compress time. China's advantage is not just scale. It is experience. Decades of operational learning, cost optimization, and process refinement. You cannot buy that overnight. The supply chain is global, but the control is not. Many countries technically possess rare earth resources, but ownership of dirt does not equal independence. If the refining and magnet production still flows through China, the leverage remains intact. This is why simply opening new mines does not solve the problem. Without downstream processing, those mines feed the same system. The limits of decoupling. In recent years, the word decoupling has entered political vocabulary. The idea that economies can simply separate. In practice, decoupling is slow, painful, and incomplete, especially when one side controls the bottleneck. Rare earths are not like consumer goods. They are deeply embedded in military, energy, and technological systems. Removing them requires redesigning products from the ground up. That takes years, sometimes decades. China understands this clock perfectly. China is not in a rush. It knows stockpiles will decline. It knows substitutes are limited. It knows rebuilding capacity is slow. Every year that passes reinforces its position. And every restriction it imposes tests how much pressure the system can absorb. This is not escalation. It is calibration. Why this is not just about America. The implications extend far beyond the United States. Europe, Japan, South Korea. All rely on the same materials. All face the same constraints. And all are discovering that strategic autonomy cannot be declared. It must be built long before it is needed. The cost of looking away. For decades, the world believed that efficiency meant outsourcing, that someone else would handle the unpleasant parts of production, that markets would always provide alternatives. China exploited that belief, not with deception, but with patience. The final reality: China did not win because it was smarter. It won because it was willing to endure costs others refused. Environmental damage, political backlash, long-term sacrifice. In exchange, it gained control over the materials that power the modern world. This is not a temporary advantage. It is structural, and undoing it will take more than policy speeches or emergency funding. It will take decades of sustained commitment and difficult choices. The world is now discovering what happens when strategic industries are abandoned, not in theory, but in practice. And by the time that lesson became impossible to ignore, the supply chain had already moved. The factories had already closed. The expertise had already migrated. China did not just win the race. It decided where the finish line would be and who would be allowed to cross it.